Hello students, this video is for class 8 subject science chapter first. So let's start with it. So as the name of the chapter suggests, that is production of crops. So in this chapter basically we'll be dealing with the various practices that a farmer has to follow for getting a good yield. So let's start, right? So in starting with it, the first definition that we have is agriculture and crops. So agriculture basically means like whenever we are growing plants on a large scale, it should be on a large scale, that time it is called as agriculture. And the main reason for doing that on a large scale could be your economical or your commercial purpose, right. So basically what do you mean by crop? Their crops can be classified as different categories, like some are cash crops, basically which are grown only for the purpose of selling, so that the farmer can earn some sort of cash. In India, basically the crops are divided into two categories, that is your Rabi crop and Kharif crops. And the basis of classification into two categories is depending on the seasons in which they are grown and harvested. So Rabi crops are the crops which are basically grown in the winter season post the rainy season, and you are usually harvested in the month of summer season, or you can say, right. Whereas the kharif crops are the crops which are basically grown sown, you can say, pre monsoon, during the pre monsoon period, and they are the crops which basically requires more water, and they are also called as monsoon crops, right. And moving on further, so what are the basically general practices, the methods that a farmer has to follow? So it includes preparing the soil, sowing the seeds, addition of manures and fertilizers, then supplying water, that is your irrigation, then moving on, removing of weeds, then we have protecting the crops, finally when it has been properly matured, and harvesting, and finally storing. So starting on first is your preparing of soil. The reason for preparing of soil basically means you are loosening the soil particles with the plow or a till, that is usually called as hull, right. The main reason for doing this is the aeration process becomes more susceptible for the soil, and it helps the roots to go deeper into the soil, right. And ultimately you can say it increases the microbial activity, and thereby resulting in good production of crop. And for this basically we can use a wooden plough or your iron plough. Now the next one we have is a sowing of seeds. So when the seeds are being sown, we have to take care of two things, they should be done either at a proper distance, and they should be done at a proper depth, right. Because if proper distance is not provided to the two seeds, right, there will be a sort of competition between the two plants which will be germinating, and if they are not sown at proper depth, they might not grow or germinate properly. So previously, traditionally, you can say the farmers used to have this method that was called as broadcasting, simply throwing off. Nowadays, modern methods are being used. We have seed drill machines are there, which make sure that seeds are being sown at a proper depth. Okay. Now the next one is basically addition of manures and fertilizers. Addition of both of these results in increasing the nutrient quality, or you can say fertility of the soil. But the basic difference between these two is as far as the manures are your biodegradable substances, fertilizers are something which are basically synthesized artificially, right. And they are nutrient specific as far as fertilizers are concerned. Normally you would have heard the word NPK. They are something which are rich in nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. As far as manures are concerned, right, they are generally they have everything, bits of everything. Now moving on to the next topic, we have irrigation fields. Irrigation basically means when you are watering the fields, okay, and it should be done in an adequate amount, right. So previously we used to have separate methods like drahat, chain pump, we had moat methods and all, which are basically not found nowadays. The modern as far as the modern methods are concerned, people go for either for sprinkler system or they go for drip irrigation. Sprinkler system is something basically used in the areas where the areas are not even, you can say, right. And basically we have a jet, right, which basically works like a sort of jet, and make sure that water is being supplied to the entire area, right. And moving on, drip irrigation is something we use where water is very scarce, and the main benefit of drip irrigation is it gives the water to the specific roots in the region where the roots are there. Now the next step is basically weeding. Weeds are nothing but the unwanted grass that may grow during the period of growing a crop, and weedicides are basically the chemical which are used for removing this, right. And as far as the protection of crops from pest and disease is concerned, basically we use chemicals which are called as pesticides. So we have generally different types of pesticides, like either it may be your insecticide or a sort of rodenticide. You might have heard of this word that is called as DDT, dichlorodyphenyl trichloroethane, which is a very famous insecticide. Now there are certain diseases given in your book which might be caused by bacteria, fungi, or your viruses. Right, wilt is a common example of a bacterial disease in which the basically the xylem, the water conducting tissues, they get blocks. So there is a deficiency of water in the aerial parts of the plants. And then we have disease caused by fungi, which is basically very famous one is the rust and smut, which occur in the wheat. And finally the disease example is like your curling of leaves in plants. Right, now comes your harvesting, threshing, and winnowing. Right, as far as harvesting is concerned, it is nothing but the cutting up of cutting the crop which when they get matured, that is generally called as harvesting. Now threshing basically means like when you are separating the seeds from the chaff, right, that is called as threshing. Right, normally you would have seen in the fields like people would be hitting the stack of the crops on drums. And finally we have one more step in this, that is winnowing, like when we have to separate some sort of chaff from the grains. Someone wanted some sort of leftover chaff is there, then time we go for the winnowing. We basically we use the wind for and we use the concept of difference in weight of grains and chaff. And storing crops is like we have to make sure when we are storing the crop, it should be done at least for a season, like for at least for a year, till the time next crop is being cultivated and harvested, right? And when we are using containers, we have to make sure that the containers are not having any sort of humidity, and even the crops when they are being put in the containers, they have to be dried properly. Nowadays one more technique is coming into picture, playing a very crucial role in the development of India as far as agriculture terms are concerned, that is your hybridization, where basically we take two different type of plants and select their specific desirable quality, and we try to crossbreed and generate a new species of plant which is having the desirable qualities of two different type of plants, right? It played a crucial role in the green evolution of India also. Right, now comes the nitrogen cycle. Basically the flow of nitrogen in the atmosphere is considered as nitrogen cycle, as we have studied in the previous classes the water cycle. That basically meant how the water flows and gets converted into different forms. Similarly we have nitrogen also. Right, now there are certain words that we have to understand basically. The first step is basically your nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation basically the thing means it can be done either by atmosphere or by the by biologically by certain bacteria. It is nothing but the conversion of atmospheric nitrogen into usable forms, so that plants can use it directly, like nitrites and nitrates, right? And next step is your nitrogen assimilation. The nitrogen assimilation is nothing but basically the conversion of inorganic nitrates into organic compounds right? And specifically it is done by the plants only. Ammonification is nothing in which the dead plants and animals are there, they get when they get dried up, okay, the nitrogen content which would be there in present in them, that would be converted into ammonia, that is called as ammonification. And then finally we have nitrification. Nitrification is something which takes place in two steps, right? And the bacteria which are responsible for nitrification are called as nitrifying bacteria, right? Certain bacteria are there like Nitrosomonas and Nitrospira, which converts ammonia to nitrate. And finally some bacteria like Nitrococcus are responsible for converting these nitrates into nitrites. And finally we have like we have studied about plants also only, like animal husbandry is also playing a crucial role, basically, which deals with like when plants and along with plants, not plants, basically the animals are being reared on a large scale for breeding and for commercial purpose. That time it is called as animal husbandry. So that's